things about the ministry, but I really do appreciate it. Guys, I'll underscore some of the things that Belinda was sharing this evening. I really do think this is an incredible ministry. And it's not because of any involvement that I have. I mean, tonight's a good example of this. I didn't have anything to do with the setup that took place in this room. The banquet committee did everything and just killed it. Absolutely, no doubt about it. I was blown away when I walked into the Kenyan staff, those in Kenya, they are the ones that are making this ministry really move, and I'm honored to be a part of that. I want to underscore a few parts of her message tonight. When I look back over 13 years of God's provision, I think it's just ridiculous, some of the things that have taken place in Kenya, in and through us. This pocket of people in Normal, Illinois, radically transforming the slums of Nairobi, I think it's incredible. But I always wonder, when we talk about things like empathy and the work that we're doing in Kenya, I always wonder about the doubters. And look, if radically transforming the slums of Nairobi is not your thing, if that's not where you connect with, where your empathy connects with action, I totally get it. But you've got to find your place. You've got to figure out where that is, whether it's in your neighborhood, whether it's at home, whether it's in some other place around the world. It doesn't matter to me. None of us are off the hook on this. I think it's really important that we find that place where we're able to connect our empathy with action, kind of like Belinda was talking here. For me, that seed of empathy started in Mitumba back in 2006, April of 2006. And I would argue it maybe didn't start with Shadrach. It started with a boy named Kevin. You see, when I first met Shadrach, we visited several people in their homes, and I immediately gravitated to this boy named Kevin. He latched onto my leg, and we started horsing around. Some of you are probably familiar with this story. We goofed around on the dirt floor of this little 10 foot by 10 foot shack that he and his mother lived in. And as we're horsing around, his mother begins telling some of her story. Her husband was physically, emotionally abusive. He was currently absent looking for work, which is code for out screwing around. And before Kevin was born, his dad had cheated on his mom and contracted HIV. And he came home and, of course, didn't tell her anything about this. And it wasn't until much later that she realized that she had contracted HIV from him. Fast forward several years and several kids later, Kevin came along and his brothers and sisters came along, and that's when she found out about this. And as soon as she found out, she went immediately to the hospital to have the kids tested. And just before I had arrived in 2006, discovered that Kevin was HIV positive also. And at this point, we'd stopped screwing around, and Kevin had wrapped up in my arms, and this kid had fallen asleep. And I'll never forget sitting in this slum shack with a mud floor and stench of garbage, and loving on this little kid and goofing off and having a good time with him, and then looking down and realizing this boy had been sentenced to death for a sin that he did not commit. And that for me was that moment of, that was when that I think I connected with that moment of empathy. Now this isn't a sad story, because shortly after this encounter with Kevin, GOYA was born. And together with Pastor Shadrach and Violet, we started the first school and the first church in Mitumba. And while I was back here in the United States, Kevin began going to that church and that school. And when I returned a couple years later, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to meet Kevin because of some other health complications and the HIV that he had contracted. Kevin didn't make it for my second visit to Kenya. But I know that he knew his Savior through the church that we had started, and I knew that he was loved and cared for in the school that Shadrach and Violet had been running in Mitumba. I couldn't see it then, but when I look back over 13 years of radical transformation in the slums of Nairobi, now I see thousands of faces of little Kevins in slums all over Nairobi that this ministry's touched. Thousands of little Kevins cared for, educated, raised up, out of abuse and poverty and made new. Look at the transformation that's just taken place this year. Gang, in January, with funds raised from last year's Give Hope Banquet, we completed the girls' dorm at the high school. It is a palace for 200 princesses that attend our high school. The place is so nice that the boys were jealous of it. And nearly every young woman that is attending that high school and living in that dorm, they come from a situation not terribly different from that of Kevin's. I'll jump off for just a second. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of with the work that we're doing in Kenya, especially this year, is that there are a lot of schools, there are a lot of ministries there that do not value the education of a woman the same way they value the education of a boy. And at our high school, in our primary schools, in the churches that we run, it's really important to us that the girls are treated just as well as the boys are. In fact, the girls' dorm is better than the boys' dorm. I love that we're a ministry that's changing that cultural narrative in Kenya and rewarding the girls for the spiritual gifts and the leadership that they bring into the world. They are the next generation of leaders that will change East Africa with the hope of Christ. This year, our ag team, with the growing student population at the high school and the increased needs to irrigate the farm, to feed all of these kids, the GOYA ag team drilled last year the second well at the high school. And earlier this year, that well came online, a completely solar-powered well that is running 24 hours a day and providing irrigation to the farm, which is producing crops for our kids to eat, and it's pumping water up into the water tanks in the boys' dorm, in the girls' dorm, and in the high school. I think that's an exceptional example of one of our other teams here, the ag team, putting their empathy into action, taking their spiritual giftedness and using it to help and serve others. Our sister organization, one cut from the same cloth as GOYA, Midwest Food Bank's East Africa Division, continues to partner with us, supplying literally tons of fresh produce to the kids in our orphanages, our schools, primary schools, high schools, outreach in the slum areas, and also literally tons of vitamin-fortified, protein-rich meals that we're sending all over East Africa now. In South B, earlier this year, we were able to snap up several additional slum shacks, little spaces across the dirt path from our original primary school there. And in February, our sponsorship team went and broke ground on the new building that was to become the first church in South B, the new home for all 81 orphans there, and an expansion of our primary school in South B. Guys, that means nearly 500 children that we previously had to turn away because we didn't have capacity for them will now be accepted into the school in South B and will receive 2 round meals a day, education, Bible training, discipleship, and teachers and staff that love and care for them. I don't know about you, but that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. But sometimes it's easy for me to get lost in the big projects when what I really need is to get lost in the individual stories and life change of each and every individual that this ministry touches. In May, I had the opportunity to visit homes again. That's something that I don't get to do a whole lot in Kenya anymore. But I was there with one of our board members, Pete Coco, and we were doing home visits. And as we stood outside of one of the new churches there, we got to meet a boy named Joseph. And Joseph lost his father to HIV when he was young. Today, he's an 8th grader, and he's responsible for a simple mud hut all by himself because just a few months before we arrived in May, he lost his mother to HIV also. And as we stood outside of his home, Madam Violet leaned into me and said, "Watch your step." And I looked over because there is a freshly dug grave where his mother was laid to rest. Guys, every day this boy comes home from school, he is looking face to face at the reminder that he's been left alone in this world. But that's not his entire story. For years, our vision has been to get so good at radically transforming the slums of Nairobi with the love and hope of Christ, with evangelism, discipleship, medical and dental care, education, agricultural work, sometimes just scooping up a kid and loving them, that one day we could confidently begin doing that at scale. After years of doing this, we've learned that radical change doesn't happen quickly. It requires deep, intentional, relational investment. Just like the 12 years of deep relational investment that we have with the kids from kindergarten all the way up through high school. But we don't want to just provide that change, that kind of radical transformation to a few when there's an entire nation that is in need of it. For example, our 8th graders, Our 8th graders that come up through our primary school, they get the first seats, the first opportunities to go into the high school, but we're not graduating enough 8th graders right now into the high school to fill all of the available seats. So when that happens, Shadrach and Violet will go out and they will look for other children in other places, in other desperate situations. And consistently, over and over again, that has led them back to a place called Homa Bay. You see, Homa Bay County has the highest HIV positive rate in the entire nation of Kenya. It's a place where, weirdly, there is a missing generation. When you go and visit there are older people, and there are younger people, and there is this weird missing gap in the middle because so many people in that generation have been lost to HIV. Several of our children in the high school come from Homa Bay County because we've had extra seats. We wanted to fill with kids that had earned the opportunity to go to high school. And because of that, some of our other children from the slums of Nairobi have gotten to know these kids, and every December around Christmas time, all the kids in the high school, they go back out to Homa Bay to go do missions work, much like we do. It's their version of our mission trip. And they've decided Homa Bay is where they're going to go. In the past several years, they've been doing that, preaching and teaching, praying over people, listening to them, loving them, taking tender mercies from the Midwest Food Bank, and distributing to those who don't have food. So last year, when Joseph's mom was still alive, without knowing him or his mom or the tragedy that was about to come into his life, we planted a little seedling of a church in Homa Bay, not far from Joseph's home. Since it's outside of Nairobi, and since it's such a small project, we've kind of kept it under the radar, because kind of like Jesus' parable of the sower, the sown seeds, it's like, okay, is this going to land and like sprout and wither in the sun, or is this going to land and sprout and get choked out in the weeds, or is this thing going to sprout and grow and thrive and bear fruit? We kind of wanted to make sure it bared fruit before we put too much into this thing. Well, May was my first opportunity to really go there firsthand and see this place in person. And I expected to see a small, simple church. And what I found was that from January until May, this place had grown to 150 members, regular attenders on Sunday morning already. And they, after seeing our model for discipleship with the primary schools, they took it upon themselves to form a new primary school powered entirely by volunteers from that church. People who had little to nothing to give decided they would start their own school to help raise up the next generation. And so pre-K to second grade, that school on their own that they had started under the name GOYA, they did this on their own, but with no financial investment from us at all, doing this entirely on volunteers, had already ballooned to 200 children pre-K to second grade. I was blown away by this, guys. But what really knocked my socks off was the rest of Joseph's story. You see, Joseph had 7 siblings when his mother passed away. 2 of the oldest siblings ended up being taken into our orphanage in Nairobi, the orphanage that we just opened a few weeks ago, guys. 2 of his older brothers and sisters are living there right now. But Joseph, an 8th grader, already halfway through his 8th grade year, already knowing some of the kids in the high school, his dream was to graduate 8th grade and one day attend our high school. And he couldn't just transfer to Nairobi into a new school. The government won't let you do that. He had to finish things out where he was. So the people of Homa Bay Church, they took it upon themselves to care for him and his 4 younger siblings. They wanted him to finish strong and achieve that dream of getting into high school. Guys, that was their way of putting empathy into action, and it was powerful. On October 29th, less than a month ago, Joseph sat for his national exams, and despite losing both parents to HIV, empowered with the hope that he had found in Christ, he passed with flying colors, and his dream of attending our high school will come true in January. He will be among 400 other students with similar stories from similar backgrounds that will get to watch our first group of graduating seniors walk and receive their diplomas this year. When I'm talking about radical life change, guys, I'm not talking about some fluffy pie-in-the-sky idea. I'm talking about kids like Joseph who is experiencing radical life change and transformation because of the love that you have poured into this ministry and the love that the staff in Kenya has then poured into kids like Joseph. And Homo Bay is not the only Seedling Church that we've planted this year. We planted a Seedling Church in a high-need slum in Nairobi called Wanyi. This church is led by a guy named Pastor Pascal, who's been mentored by Pastor Shadrach for the past several years. That church has already started. It started just a few months ago, and we hope early in 2020 to open a primary school alongside that as well. We planted a Seedling Church in a place called Kisumu, a place where showiness and flashiness is kind of celebrated and admired to the point where the culture there tells you that it's more important to spend all of your money on something showy and flashy than it is to feed your children. And people will do this there. They will buy crap they don't need and let their children go hungry because the culture's taught them that it is more valuable to do that there. Guys, it's a hard place for the gospel to take root, but we're totally committed to encouraging that new church and radically transforming Kisumu with the love and hope of Christ, the same as we've done in Nairobi. We're also making final arrangements to plant our first church in South Bean. You guys saw the video earlier. Some of you guys may not know this, but when the Matumba Church, our first ministry location, was leveled by the government, when the church there was torn to the ground, most of the people from Matumba ended up landing in South Bean, which is why we're there in the first place. And in so many ways, that church plant is like the resurrection of the Matumba Church. And finally, that church will, from the ashes that came of it, rise again. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the story of the South Bean building, I'm going to take a minute. I think it's important to take a minute and share this because it's such a fresh story. We broke ground on that building in May of this year. And over the summer, we had not received the donations that we had projected that we thought we were going to have coming in. And we were left unable to complete that building. That left 81 of our children, 81 of our orphans in a 3-bedroom house. That is cramped. Imagine that for a second. A 3-bedroom house, and you have 81 children living there, 2 parents overseeing all of this. It's crazy. But we knew that this banquet was coming up, and we thought, hey, we can fundraise into this, right? Then on October 8th, our orphans received an eviction notice from the landlord of that home. They were like, this is crazy. We can't have 81 orphans living in there. And these are slum kids. They're slum kids. They're not very nice to the place. They're breaking door handles and toilets and things like that. That's just what they are. So they received this eviction notice on October 8th, giving them exactly 1 month to vacate or be removed. But the new building was still $82,000 shy from being completed. And at first we thought, well, we could maybe move the kids in and we'll just finish the building as we go. But the government's been cracking down on that because they've had problems with buildings collapsing or children getting harmed during construction. We didn't want to do that. We couldn't get an occupancy permit anyway. Worse yet, this banquet was still 6 weeks out, but we only had 4 weeks to finish the building before those kids were going to be kicked out. And we didn't have a backup plan. There was no other place to go. And there are very few landlords that on short notice would say, yeah, take my 3-bedroom house and move 81 children from the slums into it. I remember thinking to myself, how are we ever going to pull this off? And praying about it, I was reminded of the words that Belinda shared earlier from Shadrach. By faith, God will provide. By faith, God will provide. Meanwhile, Eastview Christian Church was near the end of an all-church study called Cost. And the final challenge in the study was to sell something of value and give it away to the poor. Just like Jesus told the rich young ruler in Matthew 19:16-22. This guy comes to Jesus and he says, I followed all of your commands, I followed all of everything that you've asked me to do. What else do I need to do to get into the kingdom? And Jesus says, sell your possessions and give it away to the poor. And this guy, because he was holding on so tight to his possessions, Scripture says he went away sad. That dude missed out. I think that could have been one of the most transformational, that could have been one of the coolest stories in the New Testament. And this dude missed it. Just 6 days after receiving our eviction notice, Eastview was set to take up this special offering. They called it the Barnabas Offering. And that day, an extremely generous donor found me and gave us a check for $20,000. And I was shocked. 25% of the way there. A few days after that, I get a phone call from some of the folks at Eastview that a check for $50,000 would be on its way within 24 hours. $70,000 of the $82,000 we needed within 8 days of receiving this eviction notice. It wasn't but 2 days after that another incredibly generous donor caught wind of all of this generosity that was going on and said, I want to be a part of this too. Here's $30,000. Guys, we exceeded the goal that we needed by $18,000 in less than 10 days. But sometimes fundraising isn't the only problem. You see, from that point on, we only had 20 days to get this building finished. So we called all hands on deck in Kenya, every contractor we could possibly get our hands on, every supplier, every manufacturer, get all the supplies there that we need and get them there right now. Sometimes in Kenya, those of you who've been there, you know this, things just don't move at the same pace they do here in the States. It can take a while to get things going. But just 3 weeks ago, on November 6th, 2 days prior to Eviction Day, we welcomed all 81 of our orphans into the newly completed Orphanage School and Church in South B because of the empathetic generosity of people in our community. Not only that, but like I said, that's the building where the old Matumba Church will be reborn. That's the building where the 500 children that we have previously had to turn away because we did not have capacity to take them, that's where they'll be accepted January. Team, for those of you not keeping count, that is 4 new church plants. Homa Bay, Kisumu, Wani, and South B. That is 4 new church plants this year alone. What a crazy year this has been. Not only that, but perhaps most amazing of all this year, on November 4th, our first class of graduating seniors sat for their national exams. And I'm coming into this banquet thinking, guys, that's got to be the biggest thing we're celebrating this year, right? I've had a lot of you asking me, how did the exams go? How did it go? Are they passing? Are some of them not passing? What do we do with the ones that don't pass? All 78 students that we had sit for their national exams at our high school passed with flying colors, and every single one of them will receive their diplomas in February. And guys, that's not a one and done type of deal because we have a fully stacked pipeline of young pastors, missionaries, and lay leaders in our primary schools behind them, ready to fill their enormous footsteps. And every year from now on, as long as we get to do this ministry, we will have a senior graduating class that is being launched out into the world with 12 years of discipleship training under their belt. It was hard for me coming into this banquet thinking that was going to be the thing that we celebrate most when there's all this other stuff going on. Guys, I honestly don't know what to celebrate more. I don't know if it's to celebrate the palace that our high school princesses get to live in. I don't know if it's the first solar well that's producing vegetables on the farm. I don't know if it's the first graduating class of seniors at our high school, the completion of the discipleship pipeline from pre-K all the way up through high school. I don't know if it's the Homa Bay church plant starting their own school and ballooning it to 200 in less than 5 months, or if it's the transformational life change that takes place in the lives of kids like little Joseph. But I'm telling you, there are thousands of stories like that of little Joseph that have taken place this year, and it is all of these things that we're celebrating here tonight. Guys, the fruit this year has been absolutely crazy, and I believe we are just getting started. This next year holds a lot of excitement for the ministry in Kenya. We'll continue nursing these church plants along. We'll continue expanding these schools. We'll be adding 3rd and probably 4th grade in the school in Homa Bay. We'll start a new school in Wani Slum. We'll expand by 500, nearly double the size of the school in South B. We need to do some reinforcement work at the school in Kibera, and we might even get a chance to start building proper housing for the teachers that are caring so deeply for all these children in our high school. Make no mistake about it, guys, the table's been set for ridiculous growth in 2020, but make no mistake about it, it is going to take resources to make that happen. Right now, we would estimate that we're probably about $100,000 short of making all that happen in 2020. And I don't know if we can pull that kind of money off tonight. But I can tell you this. For nearly 13 years, we would find ourselves in these situations, and I would always ask myself, how are we ever going to do that? And after 13 years of hearing Shadrach say it, and after just a few weeks ago introducing 81 new orphans into a building that I didn't think we could get built. By faith, God will provide. When we were providing food for 30 children in a 20 by 20 shack in Matumba, and Shadrach would go and clear out every bite of food that he had in his pantry to make sure that those kids had something to eat. And I asked him, what are you going to eat? And he'd say, by faith, God will provide. When Matumba was destroyed, all was lost, and the resilient Matumba church continued meeting there, and they wanted to rebuild this thing. I'm like, how? And Shadrach said, by faith, God will provide. Just 1 year after the demolition, when we began building the high school, and it came time to put the doors and the windows on the front lower half. Those of you who have been there, just the front lower half, phase 1. We couldn't finish the doors and the windows, and they wouldn't let us open it. And I said, how are we ever going to get this done? And Shadrach says, by faith, God will provide. And he did. In fact, he not only provided for that, he provided enough for us so quickly that we were able to go and immediately start building the second half of the high school, the second floor of the high school, and it wasn't long after that that I'm in Kenya praying, the rains are coming, the rainy season's coming, and we don't have a roof on this thing. And I'm thinking, a giant tarp the size of 5 football fields? I don't know. And of course Shadrach says, no. By faith, God will provide. And he did. When we needed a bus to get our kids from the slums to the high school, shortly after getting the roof on the building, we need $62,000, and we're wondering, where the heck is that going to come from? We've exhausted all of our resources here. By faith, God will provide, and he did. When we needed a boys' dorm just a couple of years ago, because we'd run out of space in the high school for kids to sleep in retrofitted classrooms, I asked, how are we ever going to do this? And Shadrach simply says, by faith, God will provide. When we needed the girls' dorm last year, how are we ever going to do this? And Shadrach says, I have no idea. No, he didn't. By faith, God will provide. He looked me straight in the eyes and said it. Guys, just a few weeks ago, when we needed to build an orphanage and a school and a church plant with a 1-month eviction notice hanging around our neck, and we are $82,000 short, and there is no human way for us to figure out how to make it happen, I sat in my office and I was reminded of Shadrach's words. By faith, God will provide. And he did, just a few weeks ago. He did all this, and he's invited us to continue to participate in this into 2020. I know these church plants and these schools, they're going to take a lot that we don't have. I know that to scale this thing, we might even one day need to bring on a staff member. Look, guys, GOYA is 100% volunteer run. Some of you know that. I don't know that everybody realizes that. This is 100% volunteer. There is no staff in the United States. But we are tapping out our resources right now. The growth in Kenya has been crazy. There might be a day when we need to bring on a staff member. I know that this is going to mean more mouths to feed, more Bibles to distribute, souls to fill up, more textbooks in the classroom, more teachers to pour into more kids, more pastors in more churches. It's going to mean more medical and dental personnel to take care of the medical and dental needs. It's going to mean more farmland for more agricultural production. It's going to mean more sponsors for more children and more churches willing to partner deep with us in the work that God's doing in the slums of Nairobi. More mentoring, more discipleship, but ultimately it's going to mean more life change for kids like Joseph. But this year, I'm not worried about how we're going to figure that out. Because I'm telling you, by faith, God will provide. Like the rich young ruler who went away sad when Jesus told him to go sell his possessions and give it to the poor, I hope we are not holding on so tightly to our possessions tonight that we're unwilling to participate in some of the radical life change that God is doing in Kenya. Tonight's our opportunity to put our empathy into action, put our faith into action, and be a part of the life change that is on the other side of this great need. I know it can be hard to let go of our possessions sometimes, putting our trust in God and just hoping that He will provide for us as we provide for others, but I'm telling you, if you're willing to let Him use you to be a part of providing for those in need in Kenya, by faith, God will provide for you too. Guys, I so deeply appreciate partnering with each and every one of you. It has been an absolute honor to be able to do this with you for 13 years now. I hope you appreciate how powerful your generosity has been in the lives of people touched by this ministry. I really believe this. Together we are radically transforming the slums of Nairobi with the love and hope of Christ. I am humbled and grateful to do this with you guys.